Welcome to C# Step by Step. This week we'll build a ticketing system for a theme park to help us learn how to use if statements to make decisions in code. Okay, this week we are going to talk about decision points in code and how we can make programs do different things depending on conditions that are happening within the program or inputs that we provide it. And there are a couple of different ways we can do that. But today we're going to talk specifically about if and else statements. Let's suppose that we have a program where we're going to ask the user, we'll say, how old are you? And then we're going to ask for the answer to that question will come from readline, which always returns a string. And since we know that's going to be their age, we're going to convert that into an integer. So I'm going to say convert, and there are a bunch of different integer types I can use. int32, int16, uint16, uint32, etc. I'm just going to use int32. So we will pass in our answer string to that function. It will convert it to an integer and store it here. So I'm going to put all of this in one little block. So just to make sure that that's all working correctly, because again, in programming, it's good to get one part working, test it, then move on to the next part. So what I'm going to do here is use our $sign so that we can output variables, and we'll say, wow, you are age years old. Okay, so we'll just run that now and test that. And we'll move this over here so we can see the code. How old are you? We'll say 15. Wow, you are 15 years old. So we know that this part, lines 10, 11, and 12 are all working correctly. So let's go ahead and move on to the next part. What we want to do is give a different response depending on how old they say they are. So we can say if their age is less than 18, then we will print out, you are a child. Else, we will print out, you are an adult. Okay. Now, if we look at the structure here, we have the if command, the if statement, which says I'm going to ask a question, and that question always has to be answered true or false. That's the only type of question we can ask. True or false, the value inside of age is less than 18. If this is true, and only if this is true, we will execute all of the code here in between these two curly braces. Otherwise, we will execute all of the code here in between those two curly braces. All right, so let's go ahead and test how this works. So I'll run this. It'll ask how old we are. If I put 15, it will print you are a child. It'll execute only that code block. Run it again. If I say I am 18, then it'll check this statement. That will be false, so it'll skip the if block and execute the code inside the else block. Okay. One of the methods that you'll see this written sometimes is to skip these curly braces. And this will work exactly the same way. So if I run this and I say, how old am I? And I say, I'm 13, it will execute this statement. But if I run this again and I say, I am 18, it will execute this statement because this if condition is false. We call this the conditional. So when the conditional statement is true, we execute the if block. Otherwise, we execute the else block. Now, I would caution you not to write your code like this. And the reason is, let's say that you decide that you also want to include another statement that only applies to adults. You may vote for president. Okay. Notice that when I put the semicolon there, the Visual Studio, it outdents, it sticks this back over here, almost like a warning to tell me that this is not going to work the way I think. but I can ignore it, tab it over there. And it looks like if you just glance at this and you don't know a lot about coding, or this is your kind of introduction to it, you might think, okay, if their age is less than 18, it'll print this. Otherwise, it will print all of this. So you run this. How old are you? 15. And it prints the "you are a child" statement, but it also says you may vote for president, which is not what we expected. And the reason is the if and else statements only apply to the next block of code, which is this one line. If we want it to include more than one line, it looks like it's going to, but it won't unless we put curly braces around the statements. So if we put a curly brace there, and then we put a curly brace here to group those statements together, now when we run this, if I say I'm 15, it'll just execute this statement. And if I say I'm over 18 or over, it'll execute both of those. Okay, so it is a good idea to always use curly braces for your conditional statements. Now, one other thing that trips a lot of people up is because almost every line in a C# program ends in a semicolon, a lot of times people will write this. They'll put a semicolon at the end of the if statement. And if you don't have an else statement, let's get rid of our else statement here and just write the end. If I run this, how old are you? And I say I'm 15. You are a child, the end. So let's review what we think this is doing. If I'm under 18, it will execute this block of code, and then no matter what, it will execute this block of code. That seems reasonable. So if I run this and I type that I'm 18, we would expect that this block of code won't execute. But it does, and the reason it does is because this semicolon. When you put a semicolon at the end of an if statement, what you're saying is, if this is true, do nothing. Then execute this, no matter what. And so never put a semicolon at the end of your if statement. And you'll see the compiler warns you. It puts a little green squiggle here and says, you are probably wrong. You probably don't want this. And in this case, it's correct. We don't want that. Okay. All right. Now, one of the things we can do with if statements is we can chain a bunch of statements together that are called else if statements. So let's do this. Let's change our age to 13. And let's pretend we are creating the ticket console system for a theme park. So if you are under 18, you must pay $5 and you cannot ride the roller coaster. Okay, that's a bummer. And we wanted to say that if you are between 13 and 18, you can. So we can say, else if age is less than 18, you still get in on the child pass. You must pay $5, but you can ride the roller coaster, not the dollar coaster, the roller coaster. Otherwise, you must pay $8. That's the adult rate. And at the very end, no matter what, we will say, welcome to the theme park. So let's review what's going to happen here. We are going to print out our statement, how old are you? Then we are going to read their answer, which will get stored into a string variable called answer. We will then convert that to an integer, to a number that will store inside the age variable. If the age is less than 13, we will print this statement. Otherwise, if their age is less than 18, and so think about what that means. If they were less than 13, we're going to print this and then skip to the end. But if they weren't less than 13, we'll come down here and ask a second question. Are they less than 18? So if age is less than 18, then we'll print this. Otherwise, we'll print this. Okay. Now, if they're 13, it will only print this statement. Or if they're less than 13, it'll only print this statement because it'll only execute one of these blocks as long as we're using else if. If we get to this line, that means they're older, they're 13 or older, but they're less than 18. Okay, so let's run that and see what happens. How old are you? We'll say we're 12, and it'll say you must pay $5 and you cannot ride the roller coaster. Welcome to the theme park. Let's run it again and say that we're 17. You must pay $5, but you can ride the roller coaster. And again, everyone gets this printed out because it's not part of our if block. And if we run it and say that we are 19, you must pay $8. Welcome to the theme park. Okay. Now, just to see this in action, let's put a breakpoint here. It's always good if you're not clear on what code is doing. It's always good to set a breakpoint and kind of step through it. Okay. So let's drag this over here. I'm going to make this window a little smaller so we can see them both at the same time. And I'm going to use my step over command to go to the next line. It prints out how old are you, and then it waits for me to type something. So I will type that I am 15. Okay, so it has that stored in answer. We'll skip over that, and now that's stored the integer version of that into age. And then we're going to ask this question: is age less than 13? The answer to that is false, so we skip to the next question. Is age less than 18? The answer to that is true, and so we're going to enter our block and execute all of the code inside of our block. And then since we have answered true to one question in all of our connected blocks, we're going to skip over and not ask any more questions and go right to the end and print this. Let's do that one more time with someone who's less than 13, just so you can see how it skips. So again, we print out our question, we wait for the answer, type the number 12, that gets stored here. And again, notice how we can watch those variables down here. And so now I'm asking, is age less than 13? Yes, it is. So I'm going to execute this block, and then I'm going to skip all of these other statements and not even ask the questions. It doesn't matter how many else ifs I have, I will skip all of them and go to the end here. So super useful. You'll see if statements a lot. Now let's talk about compound if statements. So compound if statements, compound conditionals, you can ask two things at once. So let's pretend we're going to ask a second question. Let's pretend that our theme park on Fridays, it's half off. And so we're going to expand our logic here. And somewhere in the program, we are told whether or not, so we have a bool variable here called is Friday, and I'm just going to set that to false. So right now it is not Friday. And so what we're going to say is if the age is less than 13, and we're going to pretend half off only applies to children. So if age is less than 13, and so we use two ampersands for this, it is Friday. Now we could say is Friday is equal to true. Notice we use two equal signs to test that comparison. Is Friday is equal to true. But since this is a Boolean, we don't have to ask if it's equal to true. We can just ask if this variable itself is true. So if age is less than 13 and is Friday, then you must pay $2.50. Else if age is less than 13, you must pay $5 and you cannot ride the roller coaster. So if I'm less than 13 and it's a Friday, do this. Otherwise, do this. Okay, so we're going to pretend our is Friday discount only applies to these folks. So let's run this, and since currently is Friday is set to false, 12-year-olds will pay $5. But if it is in fact Friday, and I run this code, and I say I'm 12, I will now only have to pay $2.50 because this first statement is true. And the way this works is it says, is your age less than 13, and is it Friday? If so, if both of those are true, execute this line. Otherwise, we'll ask our next question. If that one's true, execute that code. Otherwise, ask our next question, etc., etc., etc. So let's do something else here. let's add another rule to our theme park. So right now, the rules to our theme park are that if you are under 18 and it's Friday, or if you're under 13 and it's Friday, you get in for half off. Otherwise, you pay $5. Other kids that are between 13 and 17 get in for $5. Adults get in for $8. So let's add one more thing so that we can use the or statement. So instead of 2 ampersands, we're going to use 2 vertical lines. Those are just above the backslash. So if you see that on your keyboard. So let's pretend that on Fridays, adults can get in for $5. They don't have to pay the or they don't have to pay this $8 fee. So we'll say if you are under 18 or it is Friday, then you get in for $5. No one has to pay $8 on Fridays. So let's make it be not Friday right now so we can test this out. So let's think about our logic because it's getting a little complicated. So if you're under 13 and it's a Friday, you pay $2.50. Otherwise, if you're under 13, you pay $5. If you are under 18 and you don't match one of these conditions, then you're going to pay $5. If it is a Friday, no matter how old you are, as long as you aren't under 13, if you are 20 or 30 or 50, you will pay $5. Adults on days that are not Friday will pay $8. Okay? It's a confusing theme park price structure, but it allows us to illustrate all these things. So let's go through, and I'm going to put a breakpoint here on our conditionals. We'll skip over the input part, and we'll just walk through this. So if I am 12, it'll ask this question. And the answer to that question, is it true that my age is less than 13? Yes, that part's true, but is it Friday? That part is false. And so it's going to skip to the next question and say, is it true that my age is less than 13? That is true. And so it'll print this, skip the other questions, and print that result. Now let's run it again, where I say that I am 17. Okay, is it true that my age is less than 13? That is false. So it's not even going to bother asking if it's Friday. It'll just skip that. And this is the same first part of that same question. So it's going to skip that. And now, is it true that my age is less than 17? That is true. Or is it true that it's Friday? Now, it's not Friday, but we're asking, are either of these true? And since the first one is true, the answer is yes. And so it will print this statement and skip the rest of the questions and then go to the end. Okay. Now let's do one where we are 19. This statement is false, so we'll skip ahead. That statement is false. We come down here. Is it true that I'm less than 18? Nope. So then it'll ask this question. Is it Friday? Also, no, because it's not Friday. And so it'll print our final last resort else statement. One more time, let's run this, but let's change it to Friday. So I'm going to be a 19-year-old, and we're going to ask, is it true that I'm less than 13 and it's Friday? Now, it is true that it's Friday, but it's not true that I'm less than 13 and it's Friday. So we skip that. Also not true that I'm just less than 13. Now, here's where things change. Is it true that I'm less than 18? No, I'm 19. But it is true that it's Friday. And so this whole statement is true because I'm asking, are either of these true? Since the second one is true, the whole statement is true, and we print this, and we skip the rest of those lines. Okay. So this is an or statement. This is an and statement. The and statement asks, are both of these true? The or statement asks, are either of these true? Okay. The last thing to note is that sometimes we want to test for an exact match. So let's do one more magic thing. If you are exactly 35 years old, and you are the same age as the owner, you get in free. Okay. So in this case, if they are not caught by one of these conditionals, we'll ask this question. So you'll notice that this question will never get asked on a Friday, because if it's Friday and you're under 13, this will happen. If it's Friday and you're not under 13, this will happen. So this question only gets asked during the rest of the week. So let's set this to false, and we will set our breakpoint back up here just so we can see that. Run the code. I'm going to say I'm 35. That's false. That's false. That's false. This is true. My age is exactly 35. Therefore, I get in free. Okay. Now, notice we use a double equal here to test if something, the double equal means is equal to. Okay. So if we run this again, but this time it is Friday, watch what happens now. I am 35 years old. Is it true that I'm less than 13 and it's Friday? Nope, that's not true. Is it true that I'm less than 13? Nope. Is it true that I'm less than 18 or it's Friday? That is true. So this statement will run and it will never ask if I'm exactly 35, because we can only execute one statement in this block. Okay. That wraps up today's lesson. Tune in next time and don't forget to like and subscribe.